When it comes to rookie analysis, every single edge counts, and today we are diving deep into one of the most powerful tools that we have out there, rookie models. These can give us huge advantage in understanding which players could be primed to make an impact immediately, and who better to break it down with me than two of the sharpest minds in the game. I've got Dwain McFarland from Fantasy Life joining myself and Rich to take a closer look at 6 rookies who are standing out for one reason or another in models. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this one. Dwain, before we dive into these 6 players, after a full year more of data under your belt, how confident are you in your, this is patent pending, rookie supermodel?
Yeah, you can thank Ian Hartitz for the super part. He's like, everybody's got a model, but he thought it would be funny to name it the supermodel, and it just kind of stuck. So we've kept going with that. But yeah, I mean, look, it's my favorite time of the year, honestly. I say that. Like September's really awesome as well, right? In August, you're getting to do all your drafts. September's like, okay, now you're going to open all the presents you've been drafting. Were you right? Were you wrong? Did you get the right combinations? But like, this is the time of year where everything's new, right? For every NFL team, for every fantasy analyst, for every person that just loves football, because, we've got this incoming rookie class. We don't know what our teams are going to do yet. And we get this new blood. So it's always fun. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorite parts about the year is really doing the research on the rookies. And yeah, I mean, look, every year, like the goal is like just to try to make the model a little bit better. Rich, you probably ran into this though as well. I will say 95% of like the adventures I go on, which are like, down some rabbit hole to see if I can find something new to make the model better. They come up empty. So you spend a lot of time researching things that you actually find don't matter, or it's something that like your model already captures like in another way, whether it's through draft capital signal or some other data or metric that you're using. And it's really, you really just find out, okay, this new thing you looked at is really cool. Maybe you learned a little something, but it's not good enough to end up being in the model. So I will say this, like over the last 4 years, because this is the 4th year of the supermodel, honestly, each year I honestly try to really make it simpler if I can. Like I spent a lot of time like going back and testing all the variables against one another and deciding like, does this really need to be in here, or is this just counting something that we already have? But the goal with the supermodel, like the biggest reason that I made it, and I do think I was able to make some, strides with it this year around this, is the closer we can get to comparing players like one-to-one, apples to apples, right? And so it's all about how do we normalize data is really what it comes down to for me. So strength of schedule, for example, I made a tweak to that this year. And so it's really based on power index and all the teams that you played. So using what we have from ESPN, I've also done a better job now of accounting for players because the proliferation of transfers has also made things like really interesting, keeping track of these models. So I automated a lot of things there to make sure I was weighting things appropriately for how long players played at different schools. And then program quality is the same thing. So I also have a program quality index, and it's also using the power index from over at ESPN. So made some cool things like that that are accounting for the moving around. And so I really did like that, but I try to keep it straightforward, man. Like I really only have 2 rules with the model. One, we only focus on the data points that correlate the most to future success. And then the second thing is like, I'm not looking for things that are just double counting, right? And are overlap. Like, so the number one thing is if it's not additive to draft capital, it's not included, in the model. That's why you'll see certain, like with wide receivers, I don't have athleticism in there because I think NFL teams are already doing a really good job of capturing athleticism. It doesn't add additional, predictive power to the model. But if you look at tight end or running back, like athleticism is in there. So it just comes down to the different positions and small little things like that. But it's a joy. So yeah. Hopefully Rich made even more progress than me, because I do feel like a lot of my time I spend is chasing after things that end up not being, I don't want to say they're not worth the chase, because I still enjoy it and I always hope there's like this treasure at the end, but it just doesn't always happen.
No, absolutely. I think, as you said, 95% of the time you spend saying, right, that doesn't work and need to be added. And it's like, actually, as much as I spent a lot of time that's not achieved anything, I feel like it's time well spent because I'm not tweaking something. But it's really interesting hearing you say about how you've tried to pare things down and kind of streamline it. That's kind of what I've done with a lot of my models as well this year, is that I think most years I retest everything and I look at it and I sort of, sometimes tweak things, tweak weightings, try and, is there something that I'm missing that I can add in and stuff like that. But actually this year, I think, is the first year where across all 3 of my models in terms of running back, wide receiver, tight end, I've actually stripped stuff out. and made it much simpler. So yeah, it's interesting that we're kind of both gone down a similar rabbit hole on that sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's spin this conversation forward onto our first player, and it is Ashton Jeanty. Like, Dwain, in your rookie model, your super model, you like to break down players into categories of elite, great, or good prospects in any year. In the last 5 classes, your model hasn't had more than 5 elite, great, or good prospects in any year. This year, the running back position, it's projecting for 7 of those players in total. But the thing that kind of stood out to me when I was looking at your work, and it might surprise other people, is that Ashton Jeanty at that point hadn't been classed as elite currently. What was it that was keeping him out of the elite tier in the rookie supermodel?
Yeah, so what I'll say is this: like I label these buckets within the tier, honestly, kind of just to try to make things simple for people. But what I would say is, don't get overly hung up on players being 1 point or 2 points apart. And Jeanty, he's coming in at an 89 supermodel rating. Okay. And so I labeled the elite as the 90 to 99 bucket, or the 90 to 100 bucket. But really, with Ashton Jeanty, honestly, if I just went in right now and updated his expected draft capital, which is now sitting at 6 in the mock draft database, like, he would actually move into the top tier. And so that's one of the things I try to tell people, especially in the pre-draft model. Like, don't get super hung up on guys that are like 1 point apart from each other. Really, what you're focusing on are who are the players that are in groups, and then really focusing on the hit rates for players. For each player that I write up, I'll kind of pare things down and give you a group of players that I really see them being around. And the main idea is, like, not honestly, the biggest advantage to the model, and we will jump into Jeanty, is to not get overly hung up on one player. The idea being is, if you've got a bunch of players that really show to be rated similarly in the model, and then you go to look at, say, ADP, and you're like, wow, but this guy's going 30 picks later on underdog. That's really where, like, the magic happens. Of, you're like, oh wow, like, this is a player that's probably really undervalued for whatever reason. And then the same thing can happen in your dynasty drafts. But with Jeanty, the main thing is that you have to take away, even though, yes, he came in as an 89, if you look at the running backs that have scored an 85 or higher in the rookie supermodel, they're Saquon Barkley, Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. So you're still talking about really, really good players. We're talking about guys that still in that group, like, you're 100% of the time ending up with a top 12 running back in fantasy. And most of the time you're ending up with a top 6 running back in fantasy. Like, just a very, very strong profile from Jeanty. Broke out early, did all the things that we like to see. And whenever we look at, like, the production rating in the supermodel, which does account for their teammates, their competition, strength of schedule, all these sort of things, it came out as a 93. And on the supermodel, everything is between a 50 and a 100, right? So everything's on a scale between 50 and 100. So 93 obviously being a really, really good score. And he was just really good in all facets of the game. If you look at him on the ground, his PFF rush grade was 94.8. That's 99.9% percentile. I call it 100th percentile because I round things up, and technically I know there's not a 100th percentile, but someone called me out about it. So I'm like, okay, fine, 99.9th percentile for Ashton Jeanty in his PFF run grade. And then yards after contact, 4.8. That's in the 80th percentile. Missed tackles forced, 0.38 per attempt. This is all for his career, 95th percentile. So yeah, I mean, very good on the ground. And then we know for fantasy, the main thing that really unlocks, like, the huge potential ceilings here are these guys that can be good in the receiving game. Didn't do as much as a senior, but his best receiving yard per team pass attempt was 1.88. That's in the 92nd percentile. His best target share was 16%. So really a guy that can do everything. Like, I think as a rusher, he's on par with a lot of the guys that I just named before. And then I think as a receiver, like, not on the same level as like a CMC or, an Alvin Kamara, but like one notch below that. So it's really honestly hard to find things to not like about him. Like, people that do nitpick him, the biggest thing you'll hear is, well, he played at Boise State. But the cool thing is the model's already accounting for that. The model knows that he played at Boise State. It knows that his schedule was easier. His strength of schedule, if you look at it, was in the 34th percentile going back to 2017. But it's already adjusting for that. So like, if you look, for example, at Rashad Penny, he's the other first-round pick going back to 2017 that had a really low score, like Jeanty, as far as his strength of schedule. He was 18th percentile. But when you look at Penny, his his yards per team attempt over expected, taking his schedule into account, was 0.04. When you look at Jeanty, it's 0.81 over expected, even though he played that easy schedule. So that's the cool kind of things I'm trying to do with a model, is say, okay, great, he played for this school, but still look how much better he was versus what his peers have done whenever they played against easier schools like this. So I don't see a hole. Like, I would love to hear, I honestly, like, I would love Rich if he told me if he thought there was a big hole in Jeanty's game. I just don't see one. I feel like this is like, if there's anything that's a lock in this class, it's Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm perhaps even higher on him than you are, Dwayne. So I'm not sure I'm going to be the one to find a flaw in him. I think, look, from a numbers perspective, it's absolutely bonkers. I think from a film perspective, the one slight knock I've got is that top end speed. I would love to see him run a 40, just because I do wonder how quick he is. I think at times perhaps he can get caught from behind by kind of DBs and things. But yeah, look, from a numbers perspective, he's 99th percentile for me. I don't take into account kind of strength schedule and quality of competition and stuff like that in my model. But these are the guys in the last 10 years that have been above the 96th percentile, okay? Bijan Robinson, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, and Ashton Jeanty. Those guys have averaged the best season in the first 3 years in the league of 21.4 points per game. Like, that's the category of player we're talking about. And for me, I'm very comfortable throwing Ashton Jeanty in that sort of stuff as a prospect. I think he is, I'm the guy that doesn't value running backs. I'm the guy that's always telling you, don't ever draft a running back 101 in rookie drafts. I think this year is the year to break that.
Well, it's not easier this year, though, because of the lack of good options at quarterback. Like, Rich, if Ashton Jeanty had been in last year's class, if you're thinking about Superflex Dynasty rookie drafts, how high do you think you could have pushed him in ADP then?
I don't think I could have taken him over the three quarterbacks. It's just the way I draft. I'm always going to go quarterback. I'm always going to go wide receiver early if there's elite prospects there over an elite running back. So yeah, I don't think I'd have been taking him until the fourth, maybe fifth pick, which is absolutely bonkers when you think of how good a prospect he is. But I think I'd definitely taken Neighbors over him. I think it would have been close with Harrison. And I'd have probably taken three quarterbacks over him.
How about you, Dwayne?
It would have been close. Like I agree on Neighbors and Harrison. You're probably taking them ahead of him because they were even higher in the supermodel rating. Like, they were in the high end 90s as far as the score goes. So I would have been taking them. If you're playing in a super flex, you're looking at I think he is good enough that you're looking at your roster. Like, if you've got three guys, or if you can't trade down, that sort of thing, and you really need a running back, I could see a tiebreaker being, I'm just going to go ahead and take Jeanty. I would be taking the two wide receivers over him, but I could see a scenario where you're taking Jeanty if you felt really good about your quarterback situation. Now, if you didn't, it's like Rich said, you would be taking the quarterbacks.
The only knock I can put on Ashton Jeanty is that when you watch him on film, having to watch him on that blue field in the uniforms that they wear, somebody needs to put that into the model, because that would be a big downgrade. But yeah, flawless prospect in a lot of ways. But let's move on to some guys who perhaps have a little bit more, which we can pick and pull apart. But first, if it's your first time finding us here in Fantasy Sanctuary, hit the subscribe button whilst you're here. We've got so much rookie content. We're releasing new rookie profile videos every day. Rich is pumping out Dynasty content constantly. Best ball season is getting closer and closer, and myself and Tyler will be drafting nonstop all the way until September. Let's move on. Bhayshul, Tuten, your RB8, Dwayne, the bottom of your fourth tier. Really interesting player, though. Like, he graded out as the RB6 in your non-draft capital model. But the fact that he's like being mocked in the fourth or fifth round of mock drafts is what's kind of pulling him down, isn't it? But his speed score, though, you noted it's 93. Is seriously impressive. Like, when you watch Tuten, it really is obvious just how quick he is. Like, how much hope are you holding out for him to get a better landing spot, Dwayne?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to come down to the draft capital. It's going to be big for him. But if you look at him in the non-draft capital supermodel, which is something I like to look at ahead of the draft, and I look at what's the delta, right, between the supermodel with draft capital in it. And just for the record, the non-draft capital supermodel has a correlation to future fantasy production of 0.70. Once you put the draft capital in, it's 0.76. So it's pretty good. Like even without NFL draft capital, it's actually ahead of NFL draft capital by itself. So it's something I try to pay attention to. Like my model is not as strong for wide receiver, like in that regard without draft capital. But for running back and tight end, it really is. But when you look at Tuten, like the production, you know, he has a production rating of 80. Remember, it's between a 50 and a 100 for the supermodel. That's the third best in the class. If you look at what he did, you know, his career adjusted yards per team attempt, and you guys know the yards per team attempt, that you're getting twice as many points for receiving yards as you are for rushing yards. But sometimes, you know, folks don't know that. So throw that out there. Whenever you look at him, it's like neither one of those numbers was super astronomical for him, but they were both good. Right. And so that pushes him up in the class. And then like, if you just look at his prospect grade. So whenever I deal with film, I'm like Rich, I like to watch the players, but at the same time, like I watch these guys for 2 or 3 months a year. Right. I do watch football all year, but I don't have a process like a Matt Waldman that's watching this stuff all year long, a Lance Zierlein that's watching this all year long. So what I've tried to do is go test any of this stuff I can find, any prospect grades I can find for people that just watch film that are actually putting them out there for free, because I'm never going to include it in my model if it's proprietary, right, and they're charging for it. So I end up going with Lance Zierlein's data, and it's actually really good. Like if you look at Lance Zierlein's correlation to future success in the NFL with his prospect grades going back to 2014, it's really strong. Where I'm going, there's a film rating component. So for running backs, you've got production, you've got their draft capital is the biggest thing. Then you've got their production, and then you've got their film rating, and then you've got their athleticism, which to your point, you know, it comes back to speed score really for that. But if you look at Zierlein's prospect grade, 6.26 on Tuten, you know, it talks about him as a guy that could become a starting caliber back, 3-down value. So be interested to hear, you know, what Rich saw whenever he watches him, but he talks about his contact balance, power, and home run speed, puts tremendous stress on the defense. Those are things that I saw when I watched. But again, I don't do this for a living like Lance Zierlein. So I really do lean into the fact that he's given this player this grade. The other thing I like about what Lance does is he has been trained by NFL teams, and he's projecting around the traits and things they have. So it's not just here's what I saw in film and there's a film grade, but there's also a portion of his grade that is, how does that project to the next level? Right. So when you put it all together, you add in the speed score as well. Like he's just strong across all the categories. The weakness is expected draft capital. You know, when I last updated the model, it was at 125. I think he's moved up to like 120, maybe ish, 115, maybe somewhere around there. Since I went to Cabo and didn't pay attention to the model for like a week and a half. The other thing, program quality, if you're trying to nitpick, you know, he played at North Carolina, AT&T for 2 seasons. But again, model's already accounting for that. Really easy strength of schedule, 30th percentile. Again, model's already accounting for those things as well. So I look at him as being a guy that, you know, he's got that explosiveness that NFL teams really do like, and he can get on the field in passing downs. So anytime you check those boxes for me, they typically do well in the model. So if he were to get drafted in round 3, like he would move up a lot. Like he could potentially move as high as like 4th or 5th for me. Like he could get up there in that range. I don't think he could get drafted high enough to pass Travion Henderson. He would not be able to pass Omari and Hampton, but he could get himself wedged in that range of like Caleb Johnson, some of those guys. He could be right there in that same tier with them.
Yeah, Rich, like we've talked about this previously, but like wide receivers get pushed up in expected draft capital a lot of the time because of speed, but it doesn't seem to have quite the same effect at running back. Do you think it's just like, you know, a 4.32 is a seriously impressive 40 time for Tuten? Do you think that there will be teams out there who value the speed enough to drag Tuten up there, or do you think there's flaws in him as a prospect that are going to keep him in this range?
I think the problem is that the running back isn't considered like a stopwatch position. You know, we see it every year with corners, wide receivers, where the speed is critical. And, you know, if you run a quick 40, that can affect your, you know, draft capital by a good couple of rounds. I expected Tuten after the combine. It wasn't just the 4.32 40. You know, he had almost 11-foot broad jump. He had a really good 20-yard shuttle. Like I expected him to kind of not skyrocket, but push into that 3rd round in draft capital. And he basically didn't really move. And it was kind of like,
I think it's a tough class too, though, to do it because there are so many guys good above him. I'll also say this. I think what's interesting, I think you're 100% right, Rich, with what you talked about with the 40 time and wide receivers. But that's why I don't know about your model, but in my model, I don't include athleticism for wide receivers because I really do think the NFL's actually already really accounting for it well. But at running back, it is a potential hole in what NFL teams are doing because it does add additional value to draft capital when you pull in things like speed score, whereas you don't get it for wide receivers. So interested in your thoughts on that. While it may be what the NFL thinks, like it is interesting that in the supermodel anyway, like athleticism makes it in there basically because it's like, hey, NFL's probably not accounting for this as much as they should.
And I think the problem is that when we look at wide receivers, they're a much more prototypical size of, we have a height, weight, speed that is an X receiver. We have a height, weight, speed type that is a big slot or a flanker type. Running backs come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And I don't think the pure kind of speed score 40 is quite infiltrated the NFL in that level where we're viewing running backs in distinct buckets outside of, I think there's are they a 3-down back? Are they only down back? Are they a satellite back? There's no like real distinct player types that we use for the running back position. And so a guy that's, Tuten's 206 pounds running a 4.32, he's getting thrown in the same bucket as a 230, 240 pound Cam Scatterbo or something like that because they're potential 3-down backs. And I don't think we see that distinction in size, speed, play types at the running back position like we do at the wide receiver position. I wonder if that's potentially why there's not this more kind of linear the link between speed, athleticism, player because of the size difference and the variety in types of size.
Yeah, I think there's potential. Yeah, for sure.
I think it's just going to be fascinating to see where Tuten ends up because you can see, you see the effect of someone like Devin Achan in Miami, like with the right scheme and that kind of speed, it becomes very hard to defend. And I think that there's enough Shanahan disciples around the league, and I think there's enough creative running teams around the league that could really make use of a player like Tuten. But it's like, how far are we going to see a run on running backs at a certain point, which then drags them up? Because we've quite often seen that in classes which really feature good plays. You see that run on players because teams have decided they want to get a player from that group, and then it can drag players up or it can suppress them. So Tuten definitely
go either way.
The one thing I would say about Tuten that I think is holding him back is that he's a great athlete, and I think NFL teams like that. His vision is appalling, and I think we've seen that over the last few years where someone like Bucky Irving, not a great athlete, doesn't do a lot of things well, but has such phenomenal vision that he was able to produce in the NFL. The amount of times Tuten, there's a clear, open like rush lane, and he just doesn't even see it. It's infuriating, and I think that is potentially the thing that's holding him back at the next level.
What's really interesting, like about the vision thing, is like, and I've tried to talk to scouts and other people about this, is like, is it an incorrectable thing? Like, so when you see it, is it like a knockout? Like, nope, never gonna have it. Like, and I think there's been examples of it where we've seen it, where like Miles Sanders was kind of seen for this in college, and it never worked out for him in the NFL either. But there are other guys where they're like, I remember people saying Alvin Kamara didn't have vision, and he just wanted to bounce everything to the outside, and then he gets to the league. So it's always tough, like for me to like slice and dice some of these things that like we see, with our eyes, because I wonder, like, okay, great, like we see it, but is that a static thing? Or is that a thing that can really improve? Or are they getting coached in a certain way? Or are they just used to being able to out athlete everyone, right? Yeah. And so like they don't pick the inside lane as often. And some of these guys, they learn to do it better, right? Now with Achan, he was good at the inside. He was good as an inside runner, like already coming out of college. So I agree that could make it a tough comp for him to get to Achan. But that kind of stuff's always fascinating to me. And I wish I could find a way like to really go back a long way and have something where you could actually have all that data, right? I mean, I have things like I've charted, I have things that I've seen people recently chart, but I do wonder about things like vision. And is that if you don't have it, you just don't have it forever? Because like Zierlein liked him enough with a 6.26 grade. Like that's the main thing that counts to me in the model. But I did see what you're talking about, Rich, whenever I watched him.
I do think also with the vision point that it can sometimes just be a scheme in terms of some coaches will say, this run is to the outside cheek of the guard, and you will run to the outside cheek of the guard because that's how we're blocking it. Even if a lane opens up elsewhere, they're taught you're not to break it back. You're not to look for that cutback. You are to take it where we're designed the ball to block it. And so maybe it's not that they have bad vision. Maybe it's just that the coach is very arrogant that that's the way we're going to coach the game.
We're not that far removed either from people saying that wide quarterbacks just aren't going to improve dramatically in accuracy. Now, obviously, still, that's not something we see consistently, but guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson made huge leaps in this. Yeah, Jalen Hurts. And that isn't that long ago. So the idea to me that players couldn't necessarily develop when they have that big change of scheme, particularly going to the NFL, where the coaching in theory should be as good as it is anywhere. I'd like to believe it's possible, but let's move over to the wide receiver position. Dwayne, you've got 9 players categorized as elite, great, or good prospects this year. The first time you've been single digits since 2018, which to people like myself who like to lean wide receiver heavy in a lot of drafts, it doesn't feel great. Luther Burden is your wide receiver 3. In your words, no hang your hat traits, but solid ratings across the board. If Burden was to be the wide receiver 3 in this class on draft day in comparison to last year, like Roma Dunze was wide receiver 3 last year, Zay Flowers, the wide receiver 3 the year before, Olave in 2022 and Devonta Smith in 2021. But we're probably not getting that kind of return from Luther Burden here, are we? Like, what do you feel about him as a prospect when you plugged his numbers into your model?
He's in the same range as where Zay Flowers was. Now Flowers, where Luther Burden's fallen, looking more like an end of round 1 pick at this point. That'll push him a little bit below. I mean, the main thing is like, do teams see him as a gadget player or not? Right. And if you look at the film grade from Lance Zierlein, he doesn't think that it's going to be an issue. He sees him, his quote is Missouri exploited Burden's yards after the catch talent with a barrage of short throws, but NFL teams are much more likely to diversify his usage, activating his complete skill set as a big play potential. So again, it's just like this vision thing we talked about. People are talking about this low ADOT, played from the slot all the time, had all these targets, 32% of his targets came behind the line of scrimmage in college. That is a lot. But again, it's like, okay, great. They didn't really have great quarterback play. Did they just decide to put their best player in an easy spot where they could get him the ball all the time? And they didn't let him do some of the other things that he could really do. Or is he just not good enough to do all the other things? Like, we don't really know. So there's this little bit of an unknown with Luther Burden. But I did go back and I looked at, guys that were similar to him from a standpoint of like those behind the line of scrimmage targets. So if you look at Burden, 32% of his targets came behind the line of scrimmage, 21%. Yeah, 21% came 20 plus yards down the field. Okay, which is still solid. Like, that's in a normal range for an NFL draft prospect. Calvin Ridley, if we go back, was 29% behind the line of scrimmage, 19% deep. Brandon Ayuk, 29% behind the line of scrimmage, 22% deep. Now, those guys played out wide. They weren't just stuck playing in the slot. So that's an additional kind of little knock we've got here on Burden. But at the end of the day, like, those guys went respectively at Ridley picked 26. Ayuk was picked 25 in his draft. If Burden goes at the end of the first round, in my opinion, that will be the stamp that a team does not think that he is ultimately just a scheme dependent player, because it's really tough to want to spend a first round pick on a player like that. If he falls to the middle of the second round further than we think he should, or maybe even kind of in the early part of the second round, I think that adds some additional doubts. Then we have to kind of have some more concerns that a team might have thought, we're not going to spend this early draft capital, but we're willing to, we can use him in enough ways that we'll take him in the second round of the draft. So I think that's ultimately what it'll come down to. And obviously, with the way our models work, if he ends up going in round 2, that's going to push him down anyway, because his draft capital is going to go down. But I like him. The closest comps for him in the supermodel are Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Laviska Shenault is the other one. That's the not good one. But 63% of his comps went on to have a top 36 finish in their first 3 years. 53% were top 24, 16% top 12. So you're probably not looking at a wide receiver 1 here. I mean, there's a sliver of hope for that, but I think you got a solid shot at still having a wide receiver 3 that could end up being a wide receiver 2 with Burden, is assuming that he goes at the end of round 1.
Yeah. Rich, like when I spin over to this graphic, we can see the Fantasy Life supermodel ratings for accompany Dwain's articles for everybody should be checking out. They are linked in the description down below. You can see that the highest rating there is the strength of schedule rating, which you don't use, you mentioned, in your model. Does that mean that Luther Burden's further down in your model?
No, he's still reasonably. I think he's, the names that Dwain mentioned there, that's kind of the bucket I've got him in that sort of very good but not great or elite tier. I'd sort of describe it as the recent comps that he's very close to in the model are Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnson. So I mean, you can see the range of outcomes there. I think it's a really interesting question that Dwain posed at the beginning, and I've yet to come up with a good answer for it. Is Luther Burden the best player on Mizzou's offense, and therefore they wanted to get the ball in his hands as often as possible? Or is he a limited player that had to play out the slot, struggles against press coverage, struggled, consistently getting open running routes? And it's like, I've not fully got an answer on that. I think he's a good enough route runner that he can play that, similar to Zay Flowers' role, where he's a flanker but can come in the slot and be kind of a bit of a movable piece. But I don't think he's in the Calvin Ridley, Brandon Ayuk level of, I'd class those as kind of elite route runner guys. But yeah, analytically, he ticks a lot of the boxes. I like him, competition wise. It's always good when you're playing against the teams that he did week in, week out. But there's definitely a question mark, and I'd be comfortable taking him as long as he gets that first round draft capital. As Dwain said, if he does drift into day 2, I'm going to be a little bit worried that maybe NFL teams do think he's just a gadget special teams guy, and that would significantly ding his prospects for me.
I think it's so difficult, like, for a lot of people to get their head around why the top end of the first round draft capital matters so much when we've had guys like Lad McConkey really succeed last year. Obviously, also we had Keon Coleman, who didn't really do an awful lot. Like, is it a hard line for you, Rich, when a guy falls out of round 1 into round 2, or is it like a sliding scale based on where the pick is within round 2?
Yeah, so it's I can never say the word, but I have a parabolic, that one, grade on my draft capital. So I weight both the round and the pick slightly on a scale. So yeah, round 1 is weighted significantly heavier than round 2, but it's not, the be all end all. There are guys that are round 2 draft picks that I would take over first rounders, if the their production, age just production, all that kind of stuff is there.
It's a sliding scale for me as well. And I actually so everybody's heard of the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. Well, about 10 years ago, Chase Stewart put together basically a better version of that. And so that's what I use. So every pick has a value, associated with it. It's essentially the way the NFL teams think about the value of the picks. But what I will say is, like, it's it's a logarithmic curve. So what happens is the difference between, say, pick 1 and 10 in the first round is actually huge. Yeah. With the way this thing works, right? But like when you get to pick 100 and then go to pick 110, there's not a huge difference in what the draft capital value is. So there's not a hard cut line where it's like, oh my gosh, now you're a second round. It doesn't care about that at all. Actually, it doesn't care what the round is. It's all just based off of the pick. So say Luther Burden fell from being like the 28th pick to the 34th pick. The model's still going to penalize him, but he's not getting an additional penalty, right, for becoming a day 2 pick. And again, he's still towards the top. So like there is more disparity between the picks still in that range right there at the end of round 1 versus when you get to the end of round 2 is where it really starts to flatten out. And then you get to the end of round 3, 4, and in rounds 4 and 5, there's not a huge difference in draft capital value for these players. There's still a difference, but it's not as big as what people think.
To give you an idea on that, Tom, just going back to the 2021 class. So Kadarius Toney was obviously the 20th overall pick. My model really didn't like him. He was my wide receiver 9 at that point, and that was behind Diami Brown, who was a 3rd round pick, Rondell Moore, who was a 2nd round pick, Elijah Moore and Tutu Atwell, who were both 2nd round picks. So despite the fact that his draft capital was significantly more than those 4 guys, he was still behind him in the model.
I love that. So, like, I'm diverting us a little bit here, but like, how hard do you guys find it to stick with what your rookie model tells you when it gets to draft day and you've got the ADP sitting in front of you and it's trying to decide, do I stick with the model or do I scoop some value because this guy's fallen 3 picks past ADP?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying when we opened. The goal of the supermodel is to highlight players that should be grouped together. And for whatever reason, right, one guy is going too early in drafts and another guy's going too late. So the guy that's going too early in drafts, I'm not going to draft very often. But if there's a guy that's consistently being drafted lower than what I think he should, I'm going to probably be drafting him in almost every draft that I'm in. Now, not best ball. Now, I know Tom would start talking about best ball and you probably already done 400 drafts or something. But yeah, whenever we're talking about dynasty drafts, I'm only doing a few of those, right? But whenever you talk best ball, I'm still going to be willing to draft value and things based on guys falling past ADP. But really the goal is to say, this guy's really more like these others. And so he shouldn't be going 30 picks later. So I'm going to have really high exposure to players like that. Or it could be saying the opposite. This guy's really more like this next group down, not the guys he's being picked around. Now we know different things, landing spot, the quarterback you get to play with, the depth chart, pecking order, all those things ultimately end up getting weighted in. So I do projections. I ultimately do my, in my rankings for, redraft, best ball type stuff. So I'm mostly going to pay attention to those. That's how I'm going to ultimately draft. But the model is definitely informing because talent's still the number one thing that I'm going to care about because so many things, you guys know how it goes. Once the season starts, injuries, just things as much as we study this stuff, this is still a really, really hard game to predict. And we get a lot of things wrong. I do like the idea of leaning into talent profiles, where we spend so much time trying to figure out who the good ones are.
Yeah. And Rich, I know exactly how you draft because I'm in far too many dynasty leagues with you. And I know you're very good at sticking to your rankings. So let's move on to the next player. Another wide receiver, Jalen Royals, 6'2", 205 pounds, solid production. Rich, in your rookie guide, you called Jalen Royals the potential steal of the draft if he gets the right landing spot. How high is Royals in your model if we remove draft capital and just assume that some team falls in love with him and is happy to pull him up really high?
Yeah, so in the pre-draft capital model, he's wide receiver 3 for me. So it's literally Travis Hunter's 89th percentile, Ted McMillan's 89th percentile, and then Jalen Royals is 88th percentile. So he's really in that kind of elite bucket. Plug on the film, love it. I'm a sucker for shifty route runners that can separate, and Jalen Royals tick that box. I think the age adjusted production is really good. I think the production is phenomenal over the last 2 years. The only kind of question mark is he was at Utah State and he didn't transfer and he stayed there, kind of thing. So I'd be really intrigued to hear kind of Dwain's thoughts on him because obviously he weights that. I don't. So yeah, I'd be intrigued to hear, Dwain, your thoughts on Jalen Royals and where he sits in your model.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as high as you are, but I will say it does sound like with our models, like I'm definitely still waiting more to draft capital, right? Draft capital value than probably what your model is. So that's a big thing here that's really pushing Jalen Royals down. Some of the things that you talked about, the model really does like about him. So from a production standpoint, there's 2 components. And again, I talked about it when we started off, like I try to pick things that are complementary, right? Or can help you get a better picture of what a player is. And so we just talk about production. His adjusted career receiving yards per team pass attempt came in the 38th percentile, right? Which is not good. Like that's not ideal, but If you look at his career targeted quarterback rating, which tells you like what was the player able to do when they got their opportunities, it was a 121.6, which is in the 69th percentile. So his production rating is a 76. And again, scale of 50 to 100, so slightly above average. And then the film rating that he got from Lance Zierlein, he's similar to you, Rich. He really does not quite as high as where you have him, but he does like him. He came out with a grade of an 80 in the film rating. So that was really good as well. Lance gave him a grade of 6.31. So when you put all those things together, like the non-draft capital stuff is actually pretty solid for him. So he's another guy that the model, the non-draft capital version of the model likes better than the draft capital version. There's a pretty big delta between the two. So if he were able to, end up going, say 15, 30 picks higher than where he's been getting mocked, like that would actually be a really big thing for him in the model. So I've got him right now as my wide receiver 12. Overall super model rating is a 68. Hit rate historically on players that fall in his range of the model haven't been like great. But again, we'll see where he ends up going. More of a boom bust, like wide receiver 4 type prospect, in the super model.
Yeah. So, Rich, how low is Royals once we include the projected draft capital, which we know projected draft capital tends to be fairly accurate at this point? Does he drop significantly from that kind of wide receiver 3 position for you?
Yeah, so if he's going sort of mid-third round, which is where I've got him projected at the moment, he comes in as wide receiver 8. So he's kind of ahead of the rest of the round 3 guys, but he's sort of in that third tier of wide receiver for me.
Yeah, well, let's hit on one more wide receiver. Another interesting name in Tre Harris, who we'll get to in just a second. But if you want to hear more of Rich's thoughts, his whole rookie guide is available. 50 players already in the pre-draft version, with another 40 coming after the draft. Absolutely immense copy this year. All you need to do is hit the join button down below. Silver or gold tier or above will get you access to this. That's less than the price of a Big Mac meal. And honestly, there is so much great stuff in there, and you can read all about what goes exactly into Rich's rookie model. It's Tre Harris, bit of an older rookie, which is always a little bit of an eyebrow raiser. He'll be 23 and a half years old this summer. Dwayne, he's wide receiver 6 in your rookie supermodel, coming off 3 seasons with at least 900 yards and 7 or more touchdowns. Pretty decent sized guy at 6'2", 205 pounds. What is it that the model dislikes about Harris?
Well, I mean, look, he's a 5-year prospect, so that obviously hurts. The way the model works, right? One of the adjustments that we're making to production is also age in class. So there's actually a negative correlation with future success when you don't break out right, with your breakout not being until years 4 and 5. So ultimately, your breakout has to be huge for you to for it to still actually end up being okay for you. And that's really what happened. I don't want to say his breakout was huge, but it was big enough that still, whenever you look at his production rating, it came in as an 81. So still right in the range with Luther Burden, a guy that's 2 years younger than him. Just because in those 4th and 5th seasons, like what he was able to do was still good. So his raw receiving yards per team pass attempt was 2.24. That's into the 60th percentile. But his adjusted career RIPTA is in the 51st percentile because of that age adjustment that I just talked about. So the late breakout, while it's a concern, the production rating was still good enough at an 81. And then whenever you look at what he got in the film rating from Lance Zierlein, that came in as an 80 as well. So you start pairing those two things together, and it's pretty good. And here's the thing I'm going to say with the age. Obviously, we've got a lot going on, like with the COVID and things like that, where we could be changing. Also, like players getting paid to stay in. Like, are we going to care as much as we used to, right, about players staying and playing through their senior season at least? 5th year, I have a feeling we'll still probably feel the same about a lot of these players, because if you're really good and you can get an NFL payday, NFL is still going to be able to pay you more than what you're getting in college. But looking at that, there's 2 things here. Number one, his other part of his production score, his quarterback rating for his career was 123.4. So when he got his opportunities, that was really good. That's what's helping push that rating up to an 81 overall. But here's the thing. I went back and I looked, okay, if the NFL is willing to select, Tre Harris in round 2, let's say that's where he ends up going. Pick 50 is the last that I've got in the model. I think he slid a little bit since I've updated, where he's going, but right in that range still. here are the prospects that were ages 23 to 24 at the beginning of the next NFL season, which is the way I work my model. Harris will be 23 and a half when next season starts. Here are the guys that went in round 2 since 2018. Deebo Samuel, Christian Watson, been hurt. Anthony Miller, bust. Jaden Reed hasn't done what we want. Green Bay, can we just play the guy all the time instead of having
it started so well last year,
70%. But Jaden Reed, like he's been a serviceable fantasy player, and then Rashee Rice, like, is the other guy. So what I'm not trying to say is, hey, let's draft older, late, guys that are coming out that are, in their 5th year, that are older, that are in round 2. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is, we probably shouldn't overrate it too much. If an NFL team is willing to take Tre Harris in round 2 and they put together his film and they put together, all the other things that they're looking at and they're going to take him there, I'm just not going to worry about it. I mean, because Deebo Samuel was great. Jaden Reed was a hit and Rashee Rice was a hit. So 2 of these players were not hits. And Christian Watson came from a smaller school, and he's been injured a lot. So at the end of the day, like, I don't look at it as a hard cut kind of thing, kind of like what we talked about with draft capital. The way the model works, everything's on a scale, and then each one of the components gets blended together. So when I look at Tre Harris, 38% of his comps ended up having a top 36 finish in their first 3 years. So again, to be clear, we're not talking about someone that's guaranteed to be a wide receiver 2 for you. We're talking about a guy you're drafting as a wide receiver 4 or 5 should be your expectation. And he has a chance to turn into a wide receiver 3. 24% of the time they've gone on to be a top 24 wide receiver. So you have a chance that you're getting a wide receiver 2 here, like 1 in 5 times. But it's just, I just find it funny, like, because it feels like we get into these arguments where it's like yes or no. Like, if the guy's a 5th-year prospect, you can't draft him. But then you're like, well, if a team takes him in the 2nd round, like, and they really like him, like, that's going to offset a lot of that for me. So his closest comps in the supermodel, Nico Collins is the one that works out. Terrace Marshall Jr., not so much. Anthony Miller, not so much. But you just heard me give you, hey, 38% of the time, it's a top 36 finish in the first 3 years. Well, I just gave you 3 comps where only one of them you were happy with. The other 2 you didn't like what you drafted.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, Rich, I know you don't weigh in 40 times too much when it comes to wide receiver. And we've talked about how, like, athleticism at wide receiver isn't something that should be accounted for as much as necessarily running back position or tight end, as Dwayne said. But when we saw Tre Harris run a 4.54 at the combine, did that make you just feel a little bit worse about him?
Not really, because I think watching the games, he doesn't separate. He's not a burner. I think part of the issue with him is that sort of raw athleticism. I think he's a big body. People want to project him to be that big prototypical X, but he's just not perhaps an elite athlete. Like, he's a very good athlete, don't get me wrong. But I just don't think he's elite. And that kind of is where I sit on Tre Harris, is like, I like him. He ticks a lot of boxes. It's like he's good. He's kind of feels like he's properly rated and properly graded in terms of ADP. And it's like, yeah, I'll probably have some shares of him. I'm not going to be overweight. I'm not going to be underweight. It just, like, I just feel like he's kind of okay. It's interesting you saying, Dwayne, about his comp potentially being someone like Rashee Rice, because completely different players. I just want to caveat that. But I see him in that similar mold where Rashee Rice came in as an older prospect, but was still very raw. You think of Rashee Rice for the first few weeks with the Chiefs, he basically didn't really run any routes. He just sort of get open underneath and we'll give you the ball and let you go. And I think that's a very different type of player, but that's where I see Tre Harris is, yes, he's going to be old, but he's still really raw. Like, his footwork is poor. He's not a good route runner. I don't think he can separate and kind of, we're going to project him as being an X, but I don't think he's got the release package to walk in the NFL and do that. And I'm kind of like, the model likes him. He's coming in as sort of, wide receiver 6. It's like he's okay, but I just don't love him. And I think
it's interesting because he's the most targeted player versus man coverage for his career in the class. 37% of the time he got man coverage, like his quarterback threw it to him. So there's also some of these guys that they're not necessarily great separators, and we don't want guys that have tons of contested catches because that can lead to lower catch rates and things like that. But sometimes these players that just can't, fully separate, it doesn't matter. It's like their quarterback will still throw them the ball. Now, will that hold when now you go up another level, right? We don't always know. Like Brandon Marshall's the example we think of, right? Brandon Marshall was a good route runner, but kind of a stiff player, like when you really watched him play, but it never mattered. Like his quarterbacks would just throw it to him. So I think like that's kind of where you get to with Tre Harris. Like if you kind of have a hope, like that there's this potential hole in his game that just ends up not really mattering. And maybe it's actually a feature versus a bug, you know, to kind of use like some coding language. Like you just hope that he's just this guy that even though he's not open, he's open. Right. And he has to land with a quarterback that's willing to throw him the ball. Like you need a Jay Cutler. Like you can't have a Derek Carr. If you have a Derek Carr, you're not going to get the ball if you're that kind of player. Like if you have a Jay Cutler or a Jameis Winston, you can get the ball. Like what you saw Jameis Winston do last year for Cedric Tillman, right? Whenever Winston played with him. So that's the interesting thing for me with Tre Harris was just like his quarterbacks, anytime they saw a man with him, they just got him the ball.
But how much, I guess my counter to that is how much of that is Lane Kiffin and scheming guys open? And
only 9% of his targets were behind the line of scrimmage. So it gets tough. Like once you get past that, right? Yeah. Short targets, 42%, but 26% medium, 22% deep. So the 26 medium targets, so that's 10 to 19 yards. That's in line with NFL prospects since 2017. It's actually right on the nose. He's also right on the nose with deep targets. Where I get more concerned is from a scheme standpoint is if I look at something like that and I'm like, oh my God, like everything came behind the line of scrimmage or short. And they didn't get anything intermediate in the field. They didn't get anything deep. So, I mean, it could still end up being a problem. Like there's, you know how this stuff goes, Rich, like as much as we study it and like we want to get it right, like it could still just go wrong for Tre Harris. And he is falling in a bucket. We're not saying it's a super high hit rate, but I'm not too concerned, you know, about it. And I haven't probably watched him as much as you. I think I've watched like 2 games of Tre Harris.
Yeah, I guess my concern is just, I just don't like the Ole Miss offense converting. Like I think it's a Lane Kiffin offense. I have issues with Jackson Dart being able to process, and I think that a lot of it is Jackson Dart, as you said, forcing balls into windows, not necessarily because Tre Harris is open, but because Lane Kiffin's telling him that's where the ball's got to go.
I guess where I go on that is I lean to pretty much any college quarterback probably being able to know better where he should throw the ball than me. Like once you've made it to that level, my guess is like your knowledge of the game is actually probably better than mine. And you're doing it when the ball's like whenever you're under fire. Same thing for NFL guys, like obviously. And that's why like target shares and things are so important, like for wide receivers. But that's not foolproof. Like there probably are certainly guys that you could say the opposite about, and I'm maybe giving them too much credit. So it's just kind of a heuristic like that I like to use is that like the guy's playing college quarterback probably knows more about it than me. And that's for me, not you, Rich, just speaking to myself.
Well, let's move on. We got one last player to get to. This tight end class, it looks like a lot of fun. It's good year for teams who need a tight end. There's probably no Brock Bowers in this year's class, but there's a lot of fun guys. When I was trying to pick a guy for this last player, you know, there's 2 guys in the consensus mock draft first round projections currently. Tyler Warren out of Penn State, Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Both of them look like really fun players. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper to a guy who would be a shock to go at round 1 at this point. He feels like a projection for, you know, even high-end round 2 potentially. But Harold Fannin Jr. played at Bowling Green, which is a big part of what we're probably going to talk about. He's only just turned 21 years old, 6'3", 241 pounds. Really fun player with the ball in his hands. Some true highlight reel plays. But it's definitely not quite as easy as that. Like, Dwain, what stands out about Harold Fannin, and what is it that is going to be a potential problem for us when it comes to having a lot of fun with him in fantasy?
I hope we get to have a lot of fun with him in fantasy, but it is a question. Production rating is a 100. It's the best ever of any tight end in the supermodel, which is going back to 2018 again, because I'm using a lot of advanced stats that we didn't have, you know, before then. So from that aspect, like really good, you know, for Fannin. If you look at his adjusted career receiving yards per team, pass attempt, 99.9th percentile, his career targeted quarterback rating, 79th percentile, 125. So grading out, when you grade out really high in both of those, that's how you get the best mark in the history of the model. And if you look at the guys, that were his closest, the 5 closest prospects to him were Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, Isaiah Likely, Hunter Bryant, Trey McBride. So not perfect there. I still think Michael Mayer is really
4 out of 5.
This is a pro Michael Mayer podcast.
It's a pro
Okay,
Isaiah
good.
Likely podcast.
Yeah, so I'm with you guys. I think 4 out of 5 there. Hunter Bryant is the clear one that busted, right? Still hanging around the league at least.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, really good. If you look at the film grade, a little bit lower, 77. You'd rather see that like in the 80 and above for a guy that you really like, but the model's taking it for what it is. That's how he ends up ultimately with a 77 super model rating overall. A 6.21, which is an eventual starter, right? An eventual average starter is the way Lance Zierlein, puts it over at NFL.com. You guys can check those out for yourself. He liked his ability to stretch the field, strong hands, competitiveness, but the big question everybody has, they see him as a move tight end, not someone that can play in line, don't think that he's big enough. And those things could all really be true. But remember, guys, Sam Laporta, people said a lot of the same things about him. And here's the thing that I kind of point to. Fannin's really fallen, since his athletic testing, and since people are really hung up on this, he has to be a move tight end, especially if you look at like best ball. He had really creeped up, and now he's like fallen, doesn't even always get drafted. But we could really be wrong about this. And here's why. If you look at his PFF run block grade, 69.6, that's 64th percentile. It's one of the better marks in the class. Now, he is getting the lineup in the slot. That's the first thing people say. Well, he's in the slot. Doesn't have to block any defensive ends. Guys, none of these tight ends that are really good or coming out are playing in line. They're just
Go look at Mark
anymore.
Andrews.
Yeah, go look at Brock Bowers. He didn't play in line very much at college either. I mean, people forget this stuff. They think that Brock Bowers played in line like 80% of his snaps in college. It wasn't even 50%. So if you look at the average weight of a first-round tight end since 2018, it's 249. He's 241, right? If we look at the average amount of times that a tight end played in line, that's a first-round tight end, 42%. Right? He's at 41. So it's like he's right there with these other guys, but we're like really over penalizing him, in my opinion. I think Harold Fannin's getting over penalized for these things in his game. Now, Zierlein did call out issues with his blocking. So the film actually did match some of the concerns that I've heard other film people talk about. So he's getting dinged for that. That shows up in his grade, which is hurting his film rating, which is at that 77. So the biggest thing for me that's a concern, though, is really the 4.71 40-yard dash. That was not good for what we really expected from a player like him. If you look at the supermodel and you look at the 3 different positions, the speed score, the one it matters the most for, is not running back. It's tight end. It's actually got the most additive predictive power to draft capital for the tight end position group. So we have to pare this down again. Right. So now if we take all those components together and then we look at the guys that ran in this range in the 40, that's the 35th percentile. Harrison Bryant, Isaiah Likely, and Hunter Bryant. So now you have one guy you like, right, out of the 3. So, well, I think he's getting over penalized on the talk about his weight, probably on the blocking. He's going to get coaching and things like that. There is a concern about the speed score. I was kind of hoping he would run again at the pro day and get a better time than this. So that definitely pushed him down a little bit in the model. But if you look at it, for tight ends of his caliber, 42% of them still went on to give you a top 12 fantasy finish in their first 3 years. His closest comps in the model, once you put everything together, were actually Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. So he's probably going to be a Raven, and Harrison Bryant. So
sounds good to me.
Yeah, so I like him. I think I think people have overreacted at this point, but I can't like pound the table and say he's guaranteed to be a hit because of the speed score issue.
Yeah, where do you come down on Fannin?
I pretty much echo what Dwayne said. I really like him. I think he's 99th percentile in 3 of the key metrics I look at. It's hard not to love a guy that's putting up those sort of numbers. I agree with you, Dwayne. I think people that are knocking him on blocking are watching his weight rather than the film, because I think with blocking technique for tight ends, to me, it's are they willing and more than are they able? And I think that once he gets into the NFL, you're able to hide guys. You look at Sam Laporta, like how often is he asked to block a D end one-on-one? He's not. He's getting lots of down blocks. He's getting traps. He's getting on the move. Like, they're putting him in advantageous situations so that his, lack of blocking technique isn't killing him. And I think that that's what I expect with Fannin. Is he going to be George Kittle? Absolutely not. But could he be, a Mark Andrews who's going to play out the slot 60, 70% of the time, versus slot receivers, he's going to be a plus in the run game. So I think
exactly. That's the other thing. Yeah. Versus like, a small slot wide receiver, he probably gives you a lot of the same things as a receiver, but a better blocker than that.
Yeah. So I really like him. I think, for me, he's worthy of being in that second tier of tight end in this draft class. And I do think that he's the type of prospect that, there's 32 teams. It only takes one. And whilst we're sitting here talking consensus is down on him and, he could be a 3rd round pick, there's going to be a team somewhere that's going to say, what could this guy do rather than what can't he do?
And that's the team we want him on.
Exactly.
That's the kind of team you want a player like this on, is that a team that thinks like that.
Maybe you guys can elaborate more on this for me, and maybe it's too much of an open-ended question, but do you think that draft capital matters as much with the tight end position? Because like when I look back across the last 5-6 years, we've had plenty of 1st round tight ends who haven't lived up to their potential. Not saying Brock Bowers would go down that road, but like when you look at the guys like Evan Ingram or Kyle Pitts, we've fallen for it several times, but some of the real studs have been found slightly later. Do you think there's anything to think that because the NFL slightly devalues the tight end position occasionally, that it matters slightly less with them?
I think the problem is that, again, we talked about this with wide receivers and running backs earlier. We create one bucket for tight ends, and we talk about draft capital for tight ends as everything is equal. There are so many different roles a tight end can play. Last year we look at how tight ends were drafted. The third tight end off the board was Tip Ryman, who is probably never going to catch more than 10 passes in a season for the rest of his career. But he will stay in the NFL because he is a big-bodied, very, very good technical blocker. And it's like, we need to weigh that in with them as receivers. And it's like, as much as us fancy guys are sitting here saying all we care about is fancy production, NFL teams are, looking at 2 aspects of the tight end position. And therefore draft capital isn't as linear as we would like it for the tight end position, because it's weighing in more than just pure receiving upside.
Yeah, using draft capital value, so using the chart I talked about earlier from Chase Stewart and assigning a value to all the positions. Now, this is going back to 2018, 0.71 correlation to production to average fantasy points per game over a tight end's first 3 years. That's actually better than running back, 0.70, and it's better than wide receiver, 0.67. So again, now we have some good tight ends in recent classes, and I'm looking at a smaller sample. My guess is over time it would be slightly worse. But still, it's right there with those other things. And I agree with everything Rich said as far as like there are different types of tight ends, and Tip Ryman is a really good example. That's a perfect example, actually. And we do have guys that stay in the league for 10 years that are just primarily blockers. And these guys get 2nd and 3rd contracts and have a nice living. But like looking at, the tight end position, like I still think we can highly value draft capital, because if you take one really early in round 1 or 2, typically they're ones that teams want to be a receiver for them. If you start getting to rounds 3 and 4, now you start dipping into, okay, this guy, we're going to use him, to help us in the blocking game more, right? A lot of those guys fall even further down the draft. So that really helps using the draft capital value versus just draft pick, because it's assigning way more weight to those guys going in the first couple of rounds, which are typically the ones that teams see as being able to add value in the pass game.
Is this just you as a Ravens fan, Tom, just still trying to get over the fact that you drafted Hayden Hurst over Lamar and Charlie Kohler over Isaiah Likely?
Well, we also took Mark Andrews in that same draft later than Hayden Hurst, and you got Charlie Kohler before Isaiah Likely. So, if we're going to talk about teams who are just able to find a diamond in the rough anywhere, then I have plenty of faith in the Ravens when it comes to tight ends. But enough. The people will get plenty more of my incredibly biased takes on the Ravens throughout the offseason. But Dwain, people should be reading all your work over at fantasylife.com and checking out the YouTube channel as well. But anything in particular coming over the next few weeks before the draft that you're excited about?
Working on projections right now, and then behind the scenes on new tools and things that we'll have coming. But obviously, we're gonna have plenty of coverage on the draft. There's pretty much draft all the time right now, leading up for the next 3 weeks. So we'll have several more YouTube videos. But yeah, just head over to fantasylife.com. We've got Thor Nystrom also doing film work. So you've got his stuff. We've got Ian Harditz, and then all the fantasy, the supermodel articles are all up. So running back, wide receiver, tight end, you guys can check those all out. They're completely free. If you want to see the historical supermodel grades, you can also see those. You do have to have a subscription to the site, but it goes back to 2018 for all the positions. But yeah, just head to fantasylife.com. Check it out.
Yeah, and I should point out that the subscription is incredibly reasonably priced, and you also get access to the Utilization Hub, which is an incredible tool for in-season usage. So many great stats in there. Myself and Rich will be back very soon here on this channel. You can check out our written work. Rich is over at DLF, mine over at Fantasy Pros. Subscribe to the channel if you made it an hour and 5 minutes into this video. I know you've enjoyed it. Appreciate you guys all hanging out with us, and we will catch you very soon.